Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Out of the Box with Christine. I am your host, Christine Blosdale, and I am so very happy about today's show. We're bringing back a special guest that it's been a couple years, I believe.
Yeah.
Victoria Valentino is my guest today, and in addition to being a Cosby survivor who has been such a fierce advocate for sexual assault victims, really globally, she has also been a victim empowerment speaker. She's an author. She also is a songwriter as well. And she was Miss September 1963, a year before I came into the world, but she's just one of my favorite people on the whole planet and really a master teacher to me. She's very, very close to my heart. So I want to welcome back the wonderful Victoria Valentino to Out of the Box with Christine. Welcome back, darling.
Oh, Christine, thank you so much. I'm really so happy to be here. Thank you. And I'm honored by your introduction.
Well, you're one of my very favorite people, and I just think that you are one of probably the most courageous and strongest women that I know, and I'm hoping that your story and your struggle, but your triumphs as well, will inspire women all around the world who have, maybe they haven't gone through the same thing that you have, but they have experienced some trauma in their life, and to know that there's so much more after that, and to hold people accountable who harm us. So thank you again for joining us and for sharing your story with us as well.
Well, the thing about going public is that at first you feel all of the PTSD symptoms. They trigger um, all this weird stuff, and you're going, my God, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? And you don't realize that it's a symptom of PTSD, like attention deficit. You sit down, you can't finish any of the projects that you were working on so diligently before you opened your mouth and blew your cover. And then Carolyn Heldman, who is a PhD in political science, and she was our co-chair with Aersol, End Rape Statute of Limitations, and strategized and coordinated our getting our bill passed, rallying and testifying in the Senate Committee on Public Safety in Sacramento that effectively abolished the statute of limitations on rape and sexual assault. And I was complaining to her. I was saying, I don't know what's wrong with me. All the projects, I was like every night I was crocheting an entire muffler, getting ready for Christmas. I was accomplishing all these things. I was doing my Buddha boxes and, all of the different things that I was doing and following through and completing. And then all of a sudden I couldn't sit still. I was standing up. I'd walk around the house. I'd, do all of this weird stuff. And she said, no, 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 that is PTSD ADD. That is a legitimate symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder. And I realized that all of this stuff that I'd been holding in for years and years, not that I didn't ever talk about being raped, but I didn't talk about Cosby raping me. I just let everybody know that he was an ass, and that I had had some kind of an encounter with him, and I managed to turn it into some little story that I could tell with a bit of panache, in which I wasn't as humiliated and mortified and destroyed as in fact I was. But once I started talking about all of this stuff, it really opened up a Pandora's box, if you will,
Yeah.
of all of the times. I'm a multi-rape survivor. I'm a trafficking survivor. We talked about me being Playboy's Miss September 1963. I was trafficked for 3 months by who I thought was my husband, after I became a playmate. He held my children hostage, he beat me, he starved me, and sent me out and marketed me to iconic stars in the film industry. people that you would be horrified to know about, and what their proclivities were, and some sadomasochistic icons that the whole world holds in self-esteem, in esteem. In fact, one of them I was seeing on TV as they were honoring him, all of the comedians of the world, going to the USA, across the USO, across the world, being the symbol of all America, and
Wow.
and I knew all the dirty underbelly. And I had been a trained actress. I went to the American Theater Wing in New York, majored in musical theater. I had done Shakespeare. I'd been in show business in one way or another all my life, because I came from a family of the arts. My father was an old Disney artist. He did all the backgrounds with Fantasia and Pinocchio and
Wow.
Bambi. Yeah, and he illustrated the first illustrated published copy of Frankenstein in this country in 1936. So, and my parents sang opera together, so I came from a family that was steeped in the classics, and that was all I was ever intended to do, and all I ever wanted to do. I wanted to sing and dance on Broadway, and I wanted to move an audience with the emotion of my performance, and because I had gotten raped 3 times in New York in my high school year, when I was away at private school at the professional children's school, I never talked about it, but I flirted with a lot of razor blades. And my parents never understood what happened, not that they ever asked, nor did I ever tell. And they made assumptions about what had happened with me, and treated me, as did the entire family for the rest of their lives, with these misunderstandings. I didn't find out until after my parents died that my parents had been told that I lived in a brothel in my senior year of high school in Manhattan, which is something I had no idea about. And I thought that the whole reason they were angry was because I was ditching school and I had lost my virginity. So those were the things I was defending myself against. And so then they shipped me out to my grandma in West Hollywood to be a good girl. And I thought I was going for the summer, only I got dumped. And so I went into this big depression, summer of 61. I was 18, and got involved with a guy who, he was Afro-Cuban, he was a drummer. But what I didn't understand was he was a con man. And he saw my beautiful clothes, my good jewelry and everything, and knew that I was getting an inheritance when I was 21, and hooked up with me. He saw that I was lost and depressed, typical story.
Right.
And he had the idea with another photographer that I was going to be a Playboy centerfold. It was a magazine I had never heard of. I'd never seen a pinup magazine in my life. And I thought I was taking these pictures for my husband, because we went to Baja California to get married. And I didn't know that it wasn't legal in this country unless you registered it in this country. He knew, and he knew that I was traditional and naive enough to believe that I had to do the traditional wife thing and turn over my money to my husband, which I did. My mother always told me, honey, I'm terrible at arithmetic, and so will you be, but don't worry. Your husband
Your
handles
husband will
all of
take
that.
care of it. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Which is
so,
what so many young girls were told.
exactly. And so at 18 and 19, that's exactly what I did. And I thought these pictures were to advance his career as an aspiring photographer, not having any idea that being a centerfold in Playboy was going to be a big deal. It only paid $1,000, of which I never saw one penny.
Oh,
I think I got a ruffled white lace blouse a little short black skirt, some new flip-flops, and a new bra. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Wow. And how long were you with this person?
Well, 2 years. I managed to escape, but when I did try to escape, he caught me. I was leaving with the baby. I had to leave his two children, who that was one of the ways that he always controlled all of the women, because I was not the only one. I think he must have had a root, you know. And he would take the children, his children, and give them to you to be the mother and make you feel responsible. And then he'd go out for cigarettes and be gone for 2 weeks and leave you alone with the children and no money. And there you would be, you know, panhandling or starving or begging Altadena Dairy to extend your credit one more week, you know, so that you could just eat. And
So was
so
he,
he
and was
wore
he
these people
also,
down.
was he was the one that was also trafficking you to these
Yeah,
celebrities, to
yeah.
these Hollywood? It sounds like it sounds like the whole Epstein thing. And I know that you must have been triggered when as the news about Epstein and all of the trauma that his victims, although now that he, quote unquote, air quotes, died, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing, nobody's talking about it anymore. And it's very strange to me. I know the news cycle changes fast, but I mean, it's just very strange to me that we don't hear anything anymore. But I know that you
Well,
must have been triggered by that.
I was totally triggered, but I already knew a lot about Epstein through, well, when we were at Montgomery County Courthouse going through all of Cosby's trials, the DA, Kevin Steele's father, who is an attorney from Florida, he was at every trial every single day, a true American statesman and a wonderful gentleman, kind elder statesman. And he and I talked a lot and became, I thought, pretty close during that time. Everybody adored him. He was just integrity filled in every way. And he had been spending years trying to get Epstein. And so I found out a lot of dirt on Epstein long before Epstein got actually arrested and indicted the last time and put in prison. And I knew the story about how Trump had visited his
The island.
the Lolita Express and
Yes.
his mansion. I knew all of that story about how this 13-year-old girl had been tied to the headboard of the bed and her virginity taken by Trump. And he had raped her 4 times. And Epstein slapped her around because he was angry that she allowed Trump to take her virginity. That's the backstory. Now, if you recall, during the 2016 campaign, she, as an older woman now, not old, but I don't know, she's in her late 20s or early 30s or something, she and the girl who was the procurer, who was, I think, 14,
Oh my God.
who witnessed all of this, they were suing Trump during the campaign and received so many death threats that she was so terrified that she withdrew her lawsuit. So those of us who had heard all of the backstories knew what had happened up front. You know, we got it. So when Epstein came out, it was like, yeah, great. But then when I heard he hanged himself, I didn't believe it for a minute.
No.
Not a hot New York minute.
No, because the connections and the flow of young girls that he was able to give access to, these politicians and celebrities and anybody that has money, was so vast and so much, they would never, ever choke off that supply chain, ever.
No, they would choke off Epstein as
Yeah.
quickly as possible. And I think that's what they did.
Well, I think
Now,
either they got rid of him or they just moved him to a different place because it was just too weird. Both of the guards fell asleep or whatever, and then
yeah, right.
the camera wasn't working. You know, it's just like, come on.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, it was obviously a setup. I mean, maybe some of the people in the Midwest out of the big city who are not familiar with all of this, the machinations of this element of society, maybe they believe because they live a more honest life,
Yeah.
and they, like me when I was 18, wanted to believe the best in people and couldn't imagine the negativity and the evil that is truly out there. Uh, you know, I did a keynote speech in Green Bay, Wisconsin in the end of April this year. And one of the speakers that was warming up to my keynote speech, she was, I think, with ABC, a local television station, and she was telling all of the people in the audience about teaching your children right and wrong. And when I heard that, it wasn't that I disagreed. I do agree, totally. However, we also have to teach our children to understand that not everybody has the same moral compass. And so when we go into a situation with people, we want to believe that they have the same set of standards we do, but they do not. You see, that's the whole deal. And that's what makes us sitting ducks. You know,
Totally.
we don't want to make kids suspicious and untrusting, but we do need to make them savvy, because we have people like Cosby and frankly like Trump who are sociopaths. They have no moral compass. Now, for a person who is guided by their integrity and their morality and who grew up with the golden rule, that's hard to conceive of. You can't imagine not having an internal guide that tells you when things are wrong or right.
Or you can't imagine anyone having the absolute lack of empathy.
Absolutely.
It goes against everything that we are. You know, seeing someone on the side of the road who needs help, your automatic instinct is to help them. Seeing a young child that's lost, your automatic instinct is to find their parents and get them back to safety. But these are people that don't have empathy. They lack it. So if they saw a lost child, it's an opportunity for them to abuse, to torture, whatever it is, that feeds into their power, their strength. I don't know what like I said, I can't relate because I don't know how the hell they think, but it is. These are very dangerous people that need to be off the planet.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And somewhere I read an article, and I wish I could remember what it was, because I'd like to go back and read it again or find out what the research source was. But they talked about that sociopathic behavior can be genetic.
Yes.
And that they can determine it through an amniocentesis during pregnancy, which is freaky to me. I mean, I'd always thought that some terrible trauma happened to a child early on, pre-memory, and that was what made them split off psychologically to protect their inner child.
Right.
You know, for instance, I had read when I first went public about Cosby, somebody had sent me an excerpt from one of his books, and it told a story about when he was a little boy, about 4, and his father came home drinking, raging, beating the crap out of his mother, and she wound up being unconscious, and he, at 4 years old, somehow managed to drag her out in the backyard or something, and he tried to give her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. And there was this moment of aha for me, and I thought, maybe this is when he changed. Maybe this is what shut him down. And because what he was diagnosed with was somnophilia. AKA Sleeping Beauty syndrome. You know, the kiss that brings Sleeping Beauty back to life.
Mm-hmm.
But somehow, you know, and so I thought, well, that would make sense, you know, that he could somehow have warped that, morphed that in over time into this weird fetish, you know, trying to bring his mother back to life after, you know, such terrible trauma. But somehow or another, he became the bad guy and the good guy, all mixed in. He was
Right.
the abusive father and he was the savior son.
Right. And for folks too who don't know, because we I want to get an update on, of course, on the whole Cosby the case and the survivors. But you have said once, and in our first interview, and I'll make sure that we attach the first interview that we had. So this will be part 2 of our series. I'll make sure that I have that attached to this show.
Oh,
But
fantastic.
you had said once that you believe that Bill Cosby is one of the most prolific serial rapists of our time. And for folks, again, because the news cycle goes so fast, and they still are remembering Cosby as this great dad Cosby on television.
Right.
If you can set the record straight, if you will, about Mr. Bill Cosby, and his very, very long trail of crimes against humanity, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, absolutely. I think some of the earliest recorded drugging and raping victims were from the 60s. I think the 16th that came out in 2014, but way back, I was one of the earlier known victims anyway, and I'm sure there were a whole bunch of other ones that never were known. So basically, over the years, his drugging became more sophisticated as the drugs became more sophisticated. He started out with just putting a pill by your wine glass, or telling you it was Benadryl, or telling you it was an allergy pill, or this would help your cold. It was like Sudafed or something. And because his grooming process was such, like all serial rapists, serial murderers, they have a grooming process in which they begin to get your trust, but they never just get your trust. They usually, if possible, get your family's trust or your friends' trust. They do something to make it almost impossible for you to speak out against them, because who would believe you?
Right.
They'll do something wonderful for your family. They'll give your kid's sister a scholarship. They'll do these things. They'll just ingratiate themselves into your family, so everybody's going, oh, isn't he wonderful?
He's the best thing. Right.
The best. So then when you say, but wait, he drugged and raped me, they'll go, oh, just like my mother used to say when one of their friends, who used to be called uncles in the 50s, would stick his tongue down my throat in the hallway outside of the kitchen when I was getting my mug of milk to go upstairs to bed when I was a kid, and my mother would say, well, darling, you just seem to attract that kind of attention.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
Jesus.
typical slut shaming, typical victim blaming. It's your fault.
It's your fault.
Also,
you looked so sexy at the age of 5 in your
right.
in your jammies and your milk cup.
Mm-hmm. Or 12 or 14, it didn't matter. It was your fault somehow. So yeah. So back to Cosby. He did the same kind of thing, and society blamed the victim. It's the whole "what was she wearing" thing. Why did she go out with a married man? And I got that even recently. Somebody was, in fact, well, In fact, it was somebody very close to me,
Wow.
which I was very upset by. She was upset with me because she knew Cosby.
And
And
but after hearing your story, I mean, because first of all, let's put it in context too. That night, that and you don't have to go into detail. I know it's extremely painful. You don't have to go into detail on this show. People, if they can listen to the first program for that. But when this whole thing had happened, when you encountered him and you were with a friend, right?
A roommate.
You
An
were
actress.
already suffering. You had the greatest loss in your life, which was your child.
My child.
And you were in a state of just absolute pain and suffering. And this friend was encouraging you to, come on, get out. I know you had been not wanting to do, of course, like, any parent can understand that. But you had just recently lost your baby, your child, your love. And so to have that, and then to experience this monster known as Bill Cosby, like I said, that's why I call you one of the strongest, most courageous women, because I just can't imagine that happening. I would have just folded up and just rolled up in a ball.
Well, I did. There were times when I certainly did. And then there were other times I would walk the neighborhoods of West Hollywood because I was living at my grandma's house, because 3.5 weeks after my son died, my grandma died. And then her sister, my great aunt, whose birthday was the same as my son, and she was a poet and a teacher and my inspiration, my soul sister. And the babysitter had a heart attack in my garage the month before my son died. Then my favorite uncle died. My favorite non-blood auntie died, had an aneurysm after that, all within 4 months. I had never been to a funeral. I'd never seen a human death. I was the little girl who would bury a dead bird and put a headstone and lay flowers and get on her knees and cry and pray over this little dead bird, or a caterpillar that I accidentally cut in half because I thought it was a worm and had heard the grown-ups saying that worms regenerate, only to discover that caterpillars didn't.
Yes.
And then felt remorse.
Yeah.
And here I was a child, a little teeny child doing that. So, we're talking about moral compasses built in, and that's a normal response.
Yes.
But for these sociopaths, it isn't. And so I had all that going on in this short period of time, and I was only 25. And by the time I was born December of 42. So my son died on September 6th of 69, and I didn't turn 26 until December. So I was still 25. And I keep thinking that this didn't happen with Cosby until after I turned 26. But I'm not sure, because I was walking underwater. Everything was such a fog at that time. Yeah. And another thing, I was just accused by one of the Cosby apologists of lying, because I said he was doing I Spy, but that's what somebody told me. And I was staying with my girlfriend and staying at my grandma's house. All these deaths were happening. I didn't have a TV. Somebody just told me he was doing I Spy, and I never bothered to fact check because I didn't care, frankly.
Right.
So I have only recently been accused of lying because I said he did I Spy, and apparently he no longer was doing I Spy.
This is crazy.
I know.
This is crazy, because there's hundreds, I'm sure that there are thousands of victims over the course of this man's career. He had so much money that he could buy
$500 million.
$500 million.
He practically owned NBC. He practically owned William Morris Agency. There were tons and tons of people dependent upon him. And I was told by a guy who does a blog or a news thing, Tommy Lightfoot Garrett, Highlight Hollywood. And he said that guys' careers in Hollywood were made by supplying Cosby with a steady stream of women, not just getting a one-time good gig, but their entire careers were made as long as they continued to supply him with women. And Lou Ferrigno's wife, Carla, was a pool bunny. She shot pool at the Playboy Club. And she and I were on Dr. Oz together, I don't know, two Aprils ago. And she was invited out to dinner with the Cosbys and by this gentleman that had invited her to dinner, who is a very nice man. And she said that after dinner, the Cosbys invited them back to their house, and they were shooting pool. And of course, she was a sharpshooter. And then all of a sudden, and so she was focusing on her shot, and all of a sudden realized that her date had disappeared, and so had Mrs. Cosby. And she remembers asking Mr. Cosby, well, where's your wife? And he told her that she had probably gone to bed. Well, so what wives, I mean, really think about this. How many wives do you know that would leave their husband alone with this gorgeous blonde bunny?
Oh no, what is it? Is her name Camille? Is that her name? Camille?
Yes.
She was an accomplice to all of this because she saw that bank. She was not going to stop that money train. No way.
Well, she was his personal manager. She held the purse strings. She knew where every penny went.
Wow.
So here Carla is going, oh, okay. And then she realized her date was also gone. And she thought, well, maybe he had gone to the men's room. And then Cosby offered her a drink. She said, well, no, I don't drink. And he said, well, how about a glass of water or juice? She said, no, I'm fine. I just want to get this shot.
Wow.
And all of a sudden he lunged at her. And she freaked out. She pushed him away. And she said his face changed, turned into like a monster, angry gargoyle face. And he lunged at her again. And she pushed him away and ran down the hallway. And suddenly her date emerged from a side bedroom. Mrs. never showed up. And they got out of there. Now, Tommy had told me that as a young man, now he was raised in Bel Air. He was warned by Barbara Stanwyck and Betty Davis as a young man, if he ever went to any of the parties hosted by the Cosbys, never to take anything to drink or to eat.
Whoa.
From either one of them.
So Camille was also making sure that he had the victims.
I also have a friend and neighbor who revealed to me that when she woke up from the drugging, she's a singer. She opened for Streisand a few years ago. I mean, and she woke up from the drugging and Mrs. was involved. Now, obviously, this person has been too fearful to go forward, and this has never been spoken about. I suppose I could get sued for saying it. I don't know. But she told me what Mrs. was actually doing to her, which was pretty horrific. And Mrs. Cosby, after the verdict, after guilty, after he was sent to prison, Mrs. Cosby was trying to equate him with Emmett Till.
Oh my God. Are you serious?
All I could think of was, thank God Mrs. Till was dead. Because it would have killed her. It damn near killed the rest of us to imagine that poor child, what had been done to him. And for this woman to have the brazenness to equate this serial rapist, this drugging monster of a man with this poor innocent child was just unbelievable. And his publicist, Andrew Wyatt, has been going out and trying to get him also equated with Martin Luther King, that he's a political prisoner. Wow. And then Cosby has been, he actually went, he has an appeal to appeal his guilty verdict. They were in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I can't remember the date, but recently. And of course, I heard from people who were there and told me that the judge, the people there in the court were just almost snickering. They were having to practically suppress smiles because of the ridiculous prosecution, the idea that Cosby's guilty verdict was incorrect. Now, also, during the last situation, before he was sentenced, before the verdict came through as well, the prosecution tried to blackmail the judge twice on two different issues. And they think that they can actually get anybody to care about what he has to say. I mean, how do you expect the legal system to do 180 on your verdict if you have it on record that you tried to blackmail the judge?
For folks who are not familiar with the trial, so first of all, like how long is Cosby supposed to be in jail?
3 to 10 years. He was sentenced and put in jail, I believe it was the 25th of September 2018. I was there. I saw him walked out in handcuffs, his suspenders, his white shirt, and his baggy pants, and he was shuffling out of the courtroom. They wouldn't let us stay in the courtroom while he was being handcuffed or being led out. They moved everybody out into the hallway and cordoned it off so that we had to stand behind the tape.
And how many victims would you say were there in the courtroom during that verdict?
Okay, I'll name them. Andrea Constant, who was the woman who was the icon, the shero, the one who was the only one within the statute of limitations that was able to get justice, but her justice was our justice.
Yes. Yeah.
So Andrea was there, Sindra Ladd was there, Lily Bernard was there, Therese Saragnese was there. Trying to think who else. Barbara Bowman was not there. I know I'm forgetting somebody. Oh, Sonny Wells was there.
And these are women from all different decades, as yourself. I mean, we're talking the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. Mm-hmm. And very important, something that you had mentioned, the statute of limitations, which this is like still, it's still bizarre to me that there ever even was. But can you let our listeners know a little bit about that, when what it was prior to the work that you all have done, what the statute of limitations was on sexual assault and rape before?
Well, I don't know. Well, I think it was 12 years in Pennsylvania. And of course, that's where the trial was held. And people have asked me many times, why did they hold it in Pennsylvania? Well, that's where he lived, and that's where Temple University is. And that's where Andrea Constant, she was the director of the women's basketball department. And he was on the board at Temple University. So this is where it occurred, in his mansion, the Cheltenham Mansion in Montgomery County. So that's why we had to hold the trial there. So the first trial in 2017, I think it was June 2017, it was a mistrial. There were two people, an old white guy who was walking with a walker or a cane, and then a younger black guy. Those were the two jurors who held out. Then in the verdict, when the verdict came in guilty, 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 that was in April, I think it was April or June of 2018. And then the sentencing was, there were 2 days, 24th and 25th of September 2018. And so what happened with Andrea Constant, I'm going to just paraphrase like crazy, but Castro was the DA in Montgomery County at that time. And it turns out his father was the realtor that helped Cosby buy his Cheltenham mansion. And so when Andrea Constant came forward, and then the 7 Jane Does, Therese Serenese, Barbara Bowman were a couple of those, he paid everybody off, and he didn't prosecute Cosby, he let him skate. So when Bruce Castor was up for re-election, Kevin Steele campaigned against him and based his campaign on Castor's laxity in prosecuting Cosby and sexual assault. So when Kevin Steele won the election, he immediately realized that Andrea Constant's statute of limitations was coming up. And he talked her into going forward again. It was not her idea. He said, look, you may have gotten a settlement, but you didn't get justice.
Yes.
You just got bought off, basically, and it was swept under the carpet.
Yes.
And this man, this rapist, did not get prosecuted.
And he's still out. I mean, he still can do it again.
Well, no, at that time,
right.
And probably was.
Yes.
Everybody said, oh, he's too old. He probably can't get it up. But even with Andrea, that was the whole deal. He didn't penetrate her except with his fingers. He gave her what he said were Benadryls because she was having anxiety and symptom, like allergy type symptoms.
So he drugged her till she was out, incapacitated, and then sexually assaulted her.
On the sofa. And then all of a sudden she woke up and he was penetrating her with his fingers and putting his penis in her hand and masturbating himself. So it didn't matter that he couldn't get it up on his own and actually have sex. I mean, there are many kinds of rape. I mean, it has nothing to do even with the actual physical act. I mean, there's spiritual rapes.
And he drugged her.
And he drugged her and told her it was something else. And the thing in court was that the pills that were supposed to be Benadryl, he had broken one in half. And so one of them was a whole pill that apparently looked like Benadryl, but they were trying to equate the look of the Quaalude of like, if it was broken in half, it may have looked like Benadryl, but wasn't. And so he disguised it. He obscured what he was giving her. And she innocently thought,
well, it's right. And it's Bill Cosby. Benadryl. It's everybody's dad.
Well, you see, he was her mentor.
Yeah.
She was asking him for advice and he was on the board. He was married. And by the way, the thing that hasn't really come up is that she's gay. And if you have seen her picture, doesn't she look like an Amazon? I mean, she's a warrior.
She's a warrior. Well, you're all warriors as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
But she was not interested in him, and everybody was accusing her. Well, what's a girl going to a married man's house for? And blah, blah, blah. Well, because she was gay. She wasn't even thinking like that. It wasn't on her radar.
That helped the case.
Well, but it didn't come out in court.
Okay.
It was never used in court. I was the only one who said it to one local journalist on the sidewalk in front of the courthouse after I can't remember if it was after the mistrial or I think it was after the mistrial.
If more, my question is too, if more victims come forward, now that the statute of limitations, because I know, well, that was and I don't know, is it federal or is it just state? But like the extension of the statute.
Oh, well, yeah, each state has its own. So each state has to do its own thing. Now, you know, we as the Cosby survivors have really, we've taken this platform and we have used it for future generations. We have tried very hard to not just sit there and wallow in our own sorrow and misery about our situation. We've tried to take it to a higher level and look to future generations, say, what can we really do? None of us were within the statute of limitations. None of us were able to get any money, except there were certain of the women who filed a defamation of character suit because Cosby had come out and called them liars. And I came out the day after. So therefore, I didn't qualify for that lawsuit. And they did get a settlement, undisclosed amount. But I think Therese Saragnese was one of them. Barbara Bowman was one of them, but I was not. So basically, the majority of us only got our justice through being believed and being able to tell our stories and lend our stories to the validity of what Andrea was saying in court.
Right.
And that for me, that was enough. That's all I ever went into it for in the first place, was to be able to finally tell my story. And the thing that really offended me and which was my tipping point was the fact that Barbara Bowman had been trying to be believed for 30 years about what he did to her. And all it took was a comedian to stand up in a nightclub in Philadelphia and make a joke about it. Hannibal Buress. Come on, man. You know, you can stand there and, you know, tell black kids, you know, be an authority, tell black kids how to live and pull up their pants because, hey, man, you had a successful sitcom. We all know Bill Cosby, you're just a rapist. And then suddenly it went viral. And that was my tipping point. I thought a woman can't be believed, but all it takes is a man to make a joke about it and it goes viral.
Wow,
Suddenly
that says so much about
it.
our society.
Absolutely what it says. You know, I do a spoken word thing I did with a group called the Wholesome Hecklers. And I wrote a little skit about what a woman's worth was all about. And so I walk out on stage and I'm dressed in my best Beverly Hills matron Armani and every rhinestone and diamond I could put on me. And I stood there and I told the audience what the stats were. You know, 1 in 4 women, 1 in 4, wait a minute. The rapists are prosecuted let me get this straight here. 1 in 4 rapists are prosecuted if the victim is female. 3 in 4 rapists are prosecuted if the victim is male.
Wow.
So what does that tell you about a woman's worth in today's society? So I had one of the actors step out acting like Hugh Hefner, taking me by the arm and saying, come, darling, let's come, you know, get off stage, you know, with this trivia. And I said, but darling, I'm just trying to ask the audience, what is the worth of a woman? And one of the wholesome hecklers flew these shutters open and said, 2 pigs, 10 chickens, and a goat. And my Hefner person said, and I'll take it. And they dragged me off stage amidst and I said, what about my legacy?
Yes.
So that's my little skit that I do on occasion. I have others, but that's the one that really, it just You know how sometimes you have these moments of inspiration, somebody wants you to write something or do something, and you don't think for a minute that you have anything going, and then all of a sudden the whole thing comes down
It
through you in a whole package.
yeah,
And
it's
that's,
divinely, yes, it's
yeah,
from the universe, God, love, whatever you want to call it.
yeah,
It's because you are that vessel, you're that communication,
yeah,
to speak it. Um,
yeah.
and I, I'm, I want to also touch on base while we have a little bit of time left too. I want to touch about this idea too about Hollywood and power. We're not just talking Hollywood, talking, politicians, anyone who has access to large amounts of money. And the fact that the public is still in the dark or in denial, I think, really in
Hmm.
denial that there is a huge problem going on with trafficking of girls, um, sex slavery that's happening. It's not stopping and it's not slowing down. And if there's something that you can tell our listeners about what we can do about that, because again, I think people are living in la la land, still.
Well, I think first of all, we have to educate ourselves. I understand there's an awful lot of trafficking going on in Charlotte, North Carolina. Only
Charlotte,
an
North Carolina has a lot of trafficking. Really?
Apparently so, which really surprised me because both of my daughters and my grandchildren now live there as of about 3 years ago. And I'm thinking about retiring near my children and grandchildren. And around Green Bay, Wisconsin, where I gave the keynote speech, that was one of the reasons I was there, because there is a lot of trafficking. And I think so many times traffickers target areas where people are not as perhaps sophisticated
or
and
or alert
and
or
are
on
more
alert.
trusting.
Right.
Mhm. They're
Right.
more trusting. They're more invested in their families, their community, their church, and they give everybody the benefit of the doubt. And I think, and by the way, um, I have been informed that all of the big sports events that happen,
Yeah.
it is known that's where all the traffickers, they start bringing in all the girls for all the athletes, all of the guys from out of town, all of the
The money.
organizers of
All
the
the money.
events.
All the
That's
money.
where all the money is, in the concentrated event. And they bring them in, and there are quite often very young girls. And this is happening, everybody knows about it, and what's being done? And I think we have to start with the children, with our children. We have to teach them, what is it Reagan used to say, trust but verify.
Yeah.
We don't want to turn our kids into these suspicious beings so that they don't trust the good in humanity, because that's what takes us to the next level. That's what keeps us doing the good works that we must do in society. But we have to teach them to have a critical eye
Yes.
and to be sensitive. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, PhD, she wrote a wonderful book called Women Who Run with the Wolves. And she took all of the fairy tales and told the story of the fairy tales in the sense of how women have been programmed. And one of them was the Hansel and Gretel story, and following the breadcrumbs, and how Gretel was carrying her doll. And the doll kept telling her, don't go that way, don't go that way. Well, the doll was the symbol of your intuition.
Mm.
And we as women have been told, excuse my dogs.
It's okay.
Hey, knock it off. That you, sorry.
It's okay.
So the idea that we have been taught as women that are intuitive is something just kind of la la land, is just not to be believed. It's coming from our hysteria, right?
Right.
that it's just emotional. It has no basis in reality. It's not black and white, linear, provable, verifiable
It's our gut
data.
instinct. It's our gut instinct, and it's what we excel at.
Exactly. And that's because we as women are able to access our right brain, which is spatial concepts and all of that stuff, and our left brain more easily than men. Men tend to be more left brain, black and white linear thinkers,
Yes.
and logic and all that. But we can access both much more easily. Men have difficulty accessing the right side. And so they dispute it and they discredit it because they can't access it. They don't feel it. And we are taught to also discredit it and deny it. If I had listened to my intuitive on more than one occasion, including running out to the pool when I felt this overwhelming urge to hug my child, maybe I wouldn't have found him face down on the bottom of the deep end at 6 years old, just turned 6, you know? But in my head, I heard my mother say, "Oh, you're just too emotional." Because women of that generation bought into that whole thing as well.
They
And
did.
we have been told, don't trust your intuitive. So now we are charged with teaching our women, children, trust your intuitive, listen. And we have to charge ourselves with listening, not just hear, but hear. We have to listen to our children, not go, just don't bother me with all of your, silly ideas. I've got to fix dinner. I've got to get dinner on the table.
Encourage that communication, that there's nothing that your child cannot come to you about.
Exactly.
That the days of a child should be seen and not heard and all of that. No, because you're teaching your child to hold it in, and they need to let you know, if Uncle Robbie was getting a little too close to them.
Or dropping your drawers and saying, "Here, wash it for me." Going, yes. Huh?
Yes. We need to
that happened to me when I was 5 years old, and I'd never seen a man naked before. This was the dear uncle, who took me to Central Park every day to roller skate.
It's always the ones that give you that bike at Christmas too, right? So psychologically, also what it does to a young child's mind, it's absolute. It's the worst thing you can do, because any child wants to have a new bike for Christmas. Oh my God, I got a new bike.
Yeah.
But then I have to deal with this other stuff that I don't really like, and I think I don't feel good. And it's very confusing, and it sets up a child for so much.
Oh yeah, absolutely. When I got shipped out to California from Connecticut and New York at 18, summer of 61, my mother put an old boyfriend of hers who had been singing in the USO chorus with her during World War II. And he was from Belgium, and he, in fact, did the famous sculpture of Santa Monica at the end of Santa Monica Boulevard and at the juncture of Wilshire and Santa Monica Boulevard of the Indian big bronze sculptures. And he would go to Belgium every year to see his family, and he would stop with us in Connecticut and always bring me a beautiful doll. So he was dear Uncle Rene. And so when I got dumped out in California with my grandmother, he was chosen to take me around and introduce me to everybody and show me LA and all of this stuff. And so he used to introduce me to his friends as his demi-mondain. Well, I thought, I was 18, I was trying to be so sophisticated, and I thought it was a compliment. I thought he was saying that I was his sophisticated little niece, I didn't realize until years later that a demi-mondain was kind of like his little whore.
Oh.
And then when he would take me back to Grandma's house in West Hollywood, the house that I had been taken home to from the hospital when I was born, that my great-great-uncle built, when there was nothing but a footpath from Sunset Boulevard to that house in the early 1900s, he would park in front of the house, and as I got out of the car, he'd try to give me the hug and stick his tongue down my throat. And so then when I shoved him away, and then I got my own little apartment, he came one day and he wound up saying, he was knocking on the door, and I didn't want to see him. I was so upset, you know, I didn't even open the door. And he walked up the back stairs. I was renting this little apartment underneath this old Jewish woman's house. She and her old spinster daughter lived upstairs, quiet neighborhood. And he walked up the stairs and he pushed my window, my kitchen windows open, which were right over my kitchen sink, and stuck his foot into my kitchen sink and said, "Give me back that dress and that necklace that I bought you." And I was so shocked. I'd been taking a nap, and I couldn't believe it. I was speechless, and I was terrified. And I went and I got the dress, and it was a little kind of girly, you know, little girl dress, you know, kind of a soft, dusty rose, and a necklace of multicolored corn kernels on a, you know, and I went and I handed it to him, and he took the dress and he broke the necklace and scattered the corn kernels all across my kitchen floor. He said, "I'm going to give this to a virgin."
Oh
And he
my
stormed out.
God. Oh,
Yeah.
oh.
And one thing after another. And that, all of that just kept setting me up for when Luis Valentino showed up in my life and took over. I was feeling so isolated and so rejected, and had nowhere to turn. And Luis, because that's what con men and pimps, and
They see an
that's what
opportunity.
they do. They see a lost little girl.
Yeah, that's
And
why, exactly.
he stepped into my house and he said, "You know, your Italian knit suits are too long. The hemline is higher this year." He said, "Give them to me. I'm taking them to the tailor to have them shortened." And of course, my parents in the 50s, they did that every year. I had to stand on a footstool, and Dad with, you know, the pins in his mouth, and my mother with the yardstick, and they would go around getting me ready for school and shorten last year's tweed skirts, you know, that had been my mother's tweed skirts in college. And so I just, like a robot, I went and I got them. Of course, I never saw them back. I never saw them again. So he was setting me up already, or he'd say, well, he'd show up at my door, "Meet me in the car. Oh, and brush your teeth. You've got morning mouth." And I go, "Okay," you know, 18.
So this is the importance of raising our daughters to be strong, independent, and also to have those lines of communication with us as much as possible. Because there are, let's be
Absolutely.
honest, we don't want to frighten them, but there are predators out there. And the predators, they're not going to look like somebody with a long trench coat. You know, they can look like your neighbor. They can look like like a family member. They can look like somebody's wife. Right?
Right.
So not just men.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we need to do that. Victoria, we're out of time for today's show, but I want to have you back on because I just adore you. And I think that the work that you do is so important for so many victims in this world. So would you please come back? Would you promise me to come back?
I would love to come back. And may I just say one last quick thing?
Of course.
Parents, never give up on your children. You know them, trust them, encourage them to tell you everything, and believe them and love them and embrace them. Do not throw them away, no matter what.
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you so much. And if people want to find out more about you or to get in touch with you and support the work that you do, I know you have so many different programs that you're working on behalf of victims everywhere. They can find you on Facebook, right? They can.
Yes, they can.
On LinkedIn as well. It's Victoria Valentino.
And instant messenger. You can always contact me.
Beautiful. Yeah. I love you so much. I love you so much. I'm giving you a big big virtual hug.
A virtual hug back. Thank you.
And we'll We will have you back on. And folks, I will also, in this video, we want you to share this. If you were moved, if you were touched, and you think that this can help someone, please share the video of this podcast. It's extremely important, and it's super easy to do. You just click share, put it on your social media, or send it to in an email. But please do share this show. I want to thank you all for listening and or viewing. And until next time, I want to remind you, as always, to think outside of that damn box. We've got to do that. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.